An American military operation? Why did the Pentagon send a fleet to the icy wilderness? When in the late 1940s, American newspapers reported that the Pentagon was deploying an entire fleet off the coast of Antarctica, the world was left in astonishment. The operation was called Highjump and began in December 1946. Warships, an aircraft carrier, icebreakers, dozens of airplanes, and more than 4,000 crew members, the icy continent had never seen anything on such a scale. The secrecy of the mission was astonishing. Command of the operation was entrusted to the highly experienced Admiral Richard Byrd, while the official objectives were stated in extremely vague terms, studying conditions for establishing military bases and testing equipment. However, the American military didn't just land on the ice. The fleet arrived with a real manned squadron. On board were bombers, fighter jets, and amphibious aircraft. For several weeks, dozens of reconnaissance missions flew over the frozen desert, recording ice ridges, cliffs, and strange lakes. Teams carried out continuous landings with equipment, took photographs, collected soil and ice samples, and mapped out routes for heavy vehicles. All of this took place in conditions where the temperature dropped below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and the icy wind could knock down even seasoned sailors. At some point, things got out of control. One of the Martin Mariner planes disappeared along with its 6 crew members. The search lasted several days, but the aircraft was never found. Later, the command unexpectedly called off the operation ahead of schedule. Officially, it was due to severe weather conditions. Unofficially, it was because of extraordinary circumstances. For years, reporters and historians have speculated about what exactly the mission participants saw in the depths of the Antarctic continent and why the events remained classified as secret for decades. This large-scale campaign was only the first act in a long series of mysterious expeditions that forever changed humanity's understanding of Antarctica. And after the Americans, entirely different forces entered the game, willing to go even further to achieve their goals. Nazi bases. The truth and myths about the Third Reich's expeditions. Following the sensational American expedition, old rumors once again surfaced about secret bases supposedly established by the Third Reich at the end of the 1930s on the icy continent. The story begins in 1938, when the Germans set out for the South Pole from Hamburg on the specially refitted vessel Schwabenland. The official version was scientific research and the search for new whaling grounds. But on board were not only scientists, but also engineers, SS officers, and equipment for aerial photography. The crew dropped thousands of metal markers with swastikas onto the icy expanses and took photographs for detailed maps. The area near Queen Maud Land even received the German name Neuschwabenland. Reports about the construction of temporary camps, hangars, and a fuel depot have been preserved in the archives of the Third Reich. No documents about the construction of large underground facilities have been found, although decades later, numerous legends emerged about secret laboratories, hangar complexes beneath the ice, and even submarine ports for U-boats. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, the Allies gained access to the papers and reports of the Schwabenland expedition, but not a single piece of evidence confirming the existence of permanent bases was ever found. Nevertheless, military archives declassified in the second half of the 20th century confirmed that up until 1945, the German Navy was operating in the Southern Ocean, and several submarines disappeared without a trace, and were neither found among the captured vessels nor detected by Allied signal intelligence. This gave rise to theories about secret routes through the ice shelves and supposedly surviving SS units who hid in the Antarctic ice. In the post-war years, Soviet and British researchers also tried to find any traces of German expeditions, but apart from markers and remnants of temporary structures, nothing was discovered. Archaeologists recorded equipment, canisters, and containers with German markings, but there was no evidence of the existence of top-secret bunkers, only fragments of maps and incomplete reports. Despite this, it was precisely these semi-mythical bases of the Third Reich that for many years fueled fantasies about mysterious technologies, vanished Nazi scientists, and underground complexes that could have served as hiding places for the most incredible discoveries. But if the documents didn't reveal everything, then where did some of the scientists disappear to? And why did not only people but entire airplanes so often go missing on the continent? The mystery of the vanished scientists and missing airplanes. When the first scientific teams began landing in Antarctica again after the war, the expedition rosters were regularly updated with alarming notes about missing members. In 1947, at the height of interest in the icy continent, a group of British researchers disappeared. 5 people set out on snowmobiles to measure the thickness of the ice and never made contact again. Radio stations picked up indistinct distress signals, but the search yielded no results. Neither the sleds, nor the equipment, nor the bodies were found even months later. It was as if all traces had been wiped away by an icy squall in a single night. A similar story happened to a Soviet expedition in the late 1950s. A group of young scientists was conducting a series of drilling operations deep within the glacier when, after several days, they stopped responding to communications. Emergency search teams equipped with aircraft and dogs found only tents and scattered personal gear. Some of the expedition's journals were found nearly a mile from the camp, frozen into the snow. Pilots assisting in the search noted that the area was unexpectedly crisscrossed with long ice crevasses that had not appeared in previous photographs. The disappearances of aircraft proved to be no less mysterious. In addition to the American Martin Mariner, reports of missing planes came from various countries throughout the 1940s and 1950s. In 1952, an Australian transport plane with 6 crew members veered off course and lost contact while flying over the Wilkesland area. There were no satellite images at the time, and weather conditions changed in the blink of an eye. The search helicopters found no trace, only fragments of crates with scientific equipment that had been blown by the wind for dozens of miles. A special place in the chronicles is held by the tragedy of the French expedition in 1953. A team of 7 people set out for a recently discovered subglacial lake and vanished without a trace. Several years later, fragments of the boat and a metal box containing records of temperature fluctuations clearly inconsistent with normal Antarctic conditions were discovered by chance. These disappearances were documented in reports, but the official responses were simple and terse: extreme climatic conditions, navigational errors, lack of rescue equipment. Despite everything, unpublished reports about mysteriously vanished scientists and airplanes that completely disappeared among the eternal ice continue to surface in the archives. Against this backdrop, not only Western but also Soviet stations attracted special attention, as even then they began to be surrounded by rumors of classified technologies and strange discoveries known only to a select few. The Soviet Antarctic secret. What were the Soviet stations hiding? While Western countries puzzled over the disappearance of expeditions, Soviet stations on the Antarctic ice were becoming true centers of mysterious stories. By the late 1940s, Moscow had launched a scientific race. One after another, the Mirny, Vostok, and Pionerskaya bases were opened. On the surface, everything looked routine. Laboratories were built from metal blocks, and antennas for radio communication were erected. In the evenings, long convoys of tractors delivered crates of equipment. In reality, however, military engineers monitored every arriving plane, and outsiders were not allowed onto the premises. The drilling rigs were set up not only for collecting ice. Under the cover of night, workers would travel several miles deep into the glacier, and the geologists' journals were kept under lock and key. In the early 50s, a secret project was launched at the Vostok station to search for anomalies in the magnetic field. Officially, only standard measurements were reported, but according to participants' recollections, during some shifts the instruments would fail, compass needles would spin 180 degrees, and telegraph operators would pick up short signals that no one could decipher. In January 1955, a group of engineers arrived at the base with the latest radio equipment. Among them were only military personnel who refused to communicate with civilian scientists. Special attention was given to warehouses containing imported equipment from Europe and America, which had been secretly ordered through Allied countries. At night, complex devices were brought here and immediately hidden in a separate pavilion behind a double curtain. Witnesses reported that once, soldiers walled up an entire truck full of equipment in the snow. A few days later, the equipment mysteriously disappeared, and all footage from the cameras was destroyed. Throughout the 1950s, there was an increase in cases of electronic malfunctions and strange vehicle breakdowns at Mirny and Pionerskaya. Snowmobile engines would start up on their own at night, and batteries would freeze solid within a couple of hours, even though calculations showed this shouldn't have happened. Some stations could not be reached by radio from time to time, and communication was only restored after the arrival of the next transport caravan. Those who had served at the Soviet bases for more than 6 months spoke of an unusual gleam in the ice near the drilling sites. It was as if something beneath the surface was reflecting the spotlight. Although officially neither metal nor any remains of equipment were ever found. When the Vostok station began operations in 1961, Soviet geologists classified all drilling results, and reports on laboratory analyses were sent only to the Academy of Sciences headquarters in Moscow. Even ordinary mechanics had to sign non-disclosure agreements. Only decades later did memoirs begin to hint at the discovery of unusual rock layers, stone fragments, and samples containing traces of unknown substances. In reality, none of the ordinary staff ever found out what exactly the Soviet stations were hiding in the ice. These stories gave rise to rumors thousands of miles away from the frozen continent, but not even an experienced foreign spy could penetrate the closed world of Soviet laboratories. Meanwhile, mysterious discoveries continued to accumulate in the archives, appearing on the icy map of Antarctica not only under the supervision of Soviet scientists. Ahead lay discoveries capable of overturning our very understanding of human history. Strange finds beneath the ice. artifacts not from this era. When the first drilling rigs reached the ancient layers of Antarctic ice, no one expected that objects would be found that did not fit into the modern picture of the world. As early as the beginning of the 1960s, on an ice plateau belonging to no one, a group of Australian scientists discovered a small metal plate with perfectly machined edges at a depth of more than 2 miles while collecting samples. Chemical analysis conducted in the laboratory at the Davis station revealed an unusual alloy with a high content of titanium and nickel. But such technologies were only developed at the end of the 20th century. Documentary evidence of the discovery was preserved in the Institute's reports, but the plate soon disappeared along with the courier who was supposed to deliver it to Melbourne. His helicopter lost contact and vanished in the clouds above the pack ice. The discovery made by French geologists in the Adélie Land area caused no less of a stir. During standard excavations in the ice, a cylindrical tube was found, shaped like a container for modern medical preparations, but by all indications made from monocrystalline quartz. Inside were tiny threads, and even under the most powerful microscopes, it was impossible to determine what they were made of. Later, all materials related to this object were removed from French archives due to its unclear origin. In the 60s, when Soviet drillers reached new depths, a glimmering chain of spherical elements was discovered in the ice debris not far from the Vostok station. On the surface of each one, symbols were engraved that did not belong to any known alphabet. Copies of the photographs ended up only in the personal diaries of two scientists, while the chain itself disappeared from the laboratory the very next day. The staff members who tried to find out what happened to the artifact received a severe reprimand for overstepping their authority. American expeditions encountered things that were no less strange. In 1968, during drilling operations near the Ross Ice Shelf, a fragment of a technical device was discovered featuring miniature copper windings coated with varnish. All the parts were no larger than a fingernail, and the assembly scheme did not match any known industrial designs of the time. The report was sent to Washington through the consulate, but the item was immediately confiscated by the military. Laboratory staff recalled that the day after the discovery, plainclothesmen arrived at the station, blocked access to the storage area, and removed the find under heavy guard. Unusual discoveries were also recorded at other stations. In the 70s, Japanese scientists discovered fragments of fabric deep within the snow layers that were resistant to jet steam and aggressive reagents. The chemical composition of this material did not match any known synthetic fiber. Part of the sample was sent to Tokyo, but after a few months, all correspondence about the discovery disappeared from the archives. None of these artifacts were ever displayed to the public, and almost always disappeared soon after being discovered, with their trail lost in military archives or classified laboratories. In official journals, they were referred to as industrial contaminants, anomalous inclusions, or analytical errors. But the lists of strange discoveries kept growing. Geophysicists recorded traces of stone surfaces being processed by a laser-like device, while microbiologists periodically found bacteria in the ice with DNA not found in known populations. Discoveries of this kind almost always meant only one thing: total clampdown by intelligence agencies and a new round of international tension. Who was getting rid of these objects and why? And why did the scientists who discovered them suddenly lose their jobs or even disappear from sight? No answers ever emerged. By the late 70s, the level of secrecy surrounding Antarctic expeditions was only increasing, and national bases were gradually turning into fortified enclaves with their own access rules and security measures. Ahead of the participants were not only new prohibitions, but also unexpected changes in the rules of the game across the entire continent. Restricted areas. How have international treaties changed Antarctica? While some expeditions disappeared into the Antarctic whiteness and strange artifacts were taken away by special services under the cover of night, the fate of the entire continent was being decided at international negotiations thousands of miles away from here. Since the late 1950s, the leading powers became alarmed. Too many people had disappeared, and military patrols were spotting each other too often in places where no one was supposed to be. In December 1959, representatives of 12 countries, including the USA, USSR, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, France, and Japan, unexpectedly signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington, which was intended to put an end to military games among the eternal ice. From that moment on, the entire continent was officially designated as a zone solely for peaceful scientific research. The establishment of military bases, nuclear testing, and even the extraction of mineral resources were placed under a complete ban. Any unauthorized expedition came under close scrutiny, and the presence of armed units was permitted only to assist scientists. Territorial disputes were put on hold. No country could claim any part of the ice as its own, and the boundaries of spheres of influence existed only on old maps. Instead of open control, a subtle diplomatic game was played. Access to certain areas, even for researchers, became possible only with special permission. Forbidden zones appeared areas where drilling and archaeological work were prohibited under the pretext of preserving the natural balance. In reality, these regions coincided with zones of previous disappearances of unusual finds and anomalous readings on radar maps. Even maps for civilian expeditions were printed with blank spots where nothing was marked, no terrain, no coordinates. In the 1960s and 1970s, international control of the continent intensified. Inspectors from different countries checked each other's stations, counted laboratory equipment, and cross-checked reports on fuel and food supplies. Any excess cargo or undeclared equipment could become grounds for yet another diplomatic scandal. In reality, the creation of the treaty only increased the secrecy. Reports about new discoveries or disappearances were sent through secure channels. Top secret reports were kept in separate safes at embassies and the headquarters of scientific councils. At the same time, special UN observer groups began patrolling Antarctica. According to the official version, they were monitoring compliance with environmental regulations. But according to unofficial accounts, it was these inspectors who periodically discovered strange equipment, traces of heavy machinery, and even carefully covered entrances to ice tunnels, whose origins no one would comment on. Sometimes expeditions were required to urgently leave areas where anomalous parameters or technical malfunctions were detected. Gradually, the continent turned into an ideal zone for diplomatic games and shadowy agreements. The new rules allowed countries to conceal their activities under the guise of scientific observation, and the registry of restricted sectors grew from season to season. Even today, official routes for tourists and scientists are planned with dozens of invisible borders within a single continent in mind. But despite strict agreements, Antarctica has remained a land of double standards, where every scientific project is accompanied by an invisible shadow of oversight, and the true master of the ice reveal themselves only at closed international meetings. Ahead lies the greatest mystery. Who and how managed to take control not only of the icy wilderness, but also of everything hidden beneath its miles-thick surface? Secret negotiations and modern oversight. Who really controls the continent? And so, as new restrictions only reinforced the shroud of mystery over Antarctica, a period of secret negotiations and invisible control began that few outside of narrow diplomatic circles have ever heard about. As early as the beginning of the 80s, the heads of delegations regularly met in closed rooms in Geneva, Buenos Aires, and Washington to approve new rules for access to the icy continent. At these meetings, they discussed detailed lists of prohibited zones, as well as regulations for the use of satellite imagery and the exchange of scientific data between countries. Each power demanded that its people be allowed access to the key laboratories of their rivals, but in return received the same demands. This led to the creation of special joint observation missions composed of scientists and military personnel. American intelligence agencies regularly received reports from their informants about the movements of Soviet convoys and unknown laboratories unloading unregistered equipment. In response, Soviet engineers installed complex radio interception systems at their bases to monitor foreign signals and prevent information leaks. In the 1980s, independent observers from the UN and the International Atomic Energy Agency arrived on the continent. The official purpose of their visits was to monitor the environment. But according to unofficial reports, it was under their protection that special groups carried out covert excavations near anomalous sites and removed several crates with unknown contents from there. Meanwhile, at the polar stations, competition continued between the old-timers and the new players: China, India, and South Korea. The new bases were built to be as autonomous as possible, and personnel were forbidden even to accidentally film the interiors of the laboratories. Almost every major construction project was accompanied by visits from independent experts from allied countries who signed non-disclosure agreements. In some cases, the scientists themselves disappeared from their posts without explanation, and within a couple of months, their names no longer appeared in any official reports. In the 90s, when satellite technologies became part of everyday life, Antarctica found itself under a spectacular electronic dome. Any images showing unusual objects were processed in special censorship centers, and only a handful of employees from international agencies had full access to the original data. When private expeditions tried to enter the blank spots on the map, they were detained by military patrols, and their equipment was confiscated under the pretext of violating security protocols. Today, the extensive system of control over Antarctica relies on annual closed meetings in Brussels and Washington, where, behind closed doors, even the routes of potential research expeditions are coordinated, and new rules for the exchange of ice and rock samples are established. These negotiations involve not only representatives of various countries, but also employees of the largest intelligence agencies who oversee the security of strategic sites. In recent decades, dozens of cases have been officially recorded in which scientific teams that entered unauthorized areas were urgently evacuated by order of the controlling authorities. Documents about these operations are still classified as top secret. The continent has turned into a kind of arena where diplomacy and military intelligence go hand in hand. Decisions about access to key locations are made not only by scientists but also by heads of intelligence agencies. And the final route lists are signed in the most secretive offices in the world. It is here that real control over Antarctica emerges. Those who hold this control are well known within a narrow circle, but they never call themselves the official owners of the continent. And while new antennas are being installed and routes for underground drills are being laid out across the icy expanses, most of the events that determine the future of the South Pole remain outside the scope of public reports. All that remains is to wait and see what other secrets are hidden beneath the mile-thick layers of ice, and which of today's players will be the first to uncover them.